right now. While you are lying here, the oldest living thing on Earth is breathing. It has been breathing for 80,000 years. It was already ancient before the first human civilization began. It is a forest, and tonight we are going inside it. Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Facts channel. Tonight we will be drifting into the forest. Not just any forest, and not simply the trees. We are going into the whole of it, the canopy and the roots and the dark soil underneath, the ancient fungal highways and the chemical conversations, the creatures that have never seen sunlight and the giants that have stood since before recorded history began. Forests cover about 30% of the land surface of the earth. They produce the oxygen in every breath you are taking right now. They regulate the rainfall that falls on farms thousands of kilometers from the nearest tree. They hold more carbon than the entire atmosphere. They are home to more than 80% of all land-dwelling species. And they are, in ways that science has only recently begun to understand, something far more interconnected, intelligent, and alive than anything we imagined when we first started looking closely. After centuries of botanical and ecological study, the forest has refused to become ordinary. Every time researchers think they have mapped its workings, they find another layer underneath, another conversation happening in a language they had not thought to listen for. From the tallest tree that has ever grown on this planet to the microscopic threads that connect entire woodlands into a single breathing network, the forest rewards curiosity with something genuinely astonishing at every scale. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is relax. Let your body soften and allow your breathing to slow and allow the day to gently fade away as we explore the mysteries of the forest together. Let's begin. The first forest on Earth appeared approximately 385 million years ago, and the world they created was so different from anything that existed before them that the planet was essentially transformed. Before forests, the land was largely bare rock and shallow soil, covered at most by low mosses and simple plants that rarely grew more than a few centimeters tall. Then trees evolved, and with them came roots capable of penetrating deep into rock, breaking it apart, drawing nutrients upward, and building soil on a scale and at a depth that nothing before them had managed. The first forests were strange by modern standards, dominated by tall tree-like plants called Archaeopteris and enormous club mosses that bore no leaves as we would recognize them and reproduce by spores rather than seeds. But their appearance changed everything. They pulled carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere on an enormous scale, contributing to a cooling of the global climate that may have triggered one of the major ice ages of that era. They created new habitats for insects, amphibians, and the first terrestrial vertebrates. They built the coal deposits that would power the Industrial Revolution 350 million years later. The forest did not simply arrive in the world. It remade the world around itself, the way it has continued to do in every era since. A single mature tree can have a root system that extends far beyond the spread of its canopy, reaching outward through the soil in all directions in a network so extensive that its total length, if all the fine roots and root hairs were laid end to end, might stretch for several hundred kilometers. Roots do not simply anchor trees and absorb water. They are active sensory and communicative organs, constantly probing the soil for nutrients, moisture, and chemical signals from neighboring plants. They exude compounds called root exudates into the soil around them, attracting specific soil microbes, repelling competing plants, and communicating with the fungal networks that connect them to the rest of the forest. The zone immediately around the root tips, called the rhizosphere, is one of the most biologically active environments on Earth, teeming with bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and other organisms that engage in exchanges with the root in a complex economy of nutrients, signals, and services. When a root encounters an obstacle, it does not simply stop. It grows around it, seeks a new path, redirects its effort. It explores its environment with a persistence and adaptability that, in any animal, we would not hesitate to call purposeful. The root system of a forest is its hidden architecture, invisible from above, but in many ways the most important part of the whole structure. Beneath the forest floor, running through the soil in a network of extraordinary complexity and scale, are the fungal threads that connect trees across entire woodlands into something that researchers have come to call the Wood Wide Web. The mycorrhizal network, formed by specialized soil fungi that colonize tree roots and extend their own filaments called hyphae far out into the surrounding soil, functions as both a transport system and a communication channel for forests. Through this network, carbon fixed by photosynthesis in one tree can be transferred as sugars to a neighboring tree that is stressed, shaded, or struggling. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and water can move from areas of abundance to areas of scarcity. Warning signals about insect attack can travel from a tree under threat to its neighbors before the insects arrive. The fungi are not simply passive pipes. They are active participants in the exchange, managing the flow of resources between partners, taking a share of the sugars they transport as payment for their services, and adjusting the network in response to the changing needs of the forest community. The Wood Wide Web spans entire forest ecosystems and may connect individuals that are hundreds of meters apart. It is an infrastructure of mutual support that has been operating continuously for hundreds of millions of years, built and maintained by organisms that have no brains, no nervous systems, and no intentions, yet whose collective behavior produces something that functions, in every practical sense, like a community. Stay with me here, because what comes next is something that most people who walk through forests every day have no idea is happening around them. Trees communicate. Not in the way that animals communicate, not with sounds or signals visible to the eye, but through chemistry, through the air, and through the ground, in a language of molecules that other trees can read and respond to. When a tree is attacked by insects, it releases a mixture of volatile chemical compounds into the air around it. These compounds travel downwind and are detected by neighboring trees through their leaves, which absorb the molecules and respond by producing defensive compounds of their own, toughening their cell walls, increasing the bitterness of their leaves, and sometimes producing chemicals that attract the predators of the insects that are doing the damage. The response can happen within hours of the initial attack signal, giving neighboring trees a head start on defense before the insect reach them. The same warning signals can travel through the soil via mycorrhizal networks, reaching trees that are not downwind and might not have received the airborne message. In some species, the chemical signals are specific enough that trees can distinguish between the damage caused by different species of insect and produce targeted defensive responses appropriate to the specific threat. This is not metaphor. It is measurable chemistry, replicated in controlled experiments, producing outcomes that have no explanation other than information transfer between individual trees. The forest is not silent. It is having conversations we are only beginning to learn how to hear. Sequoia trees are the largest living things on Earth by volume, and their scale is genuinely difficult to hold in the mind even when you are standing at the base of one. The largest known living sequoia, a tree called General Sherman in Sequoia National Park in California, stands at 84 meters tall, has a base circumference of over 31 meters, and contains an estimated volume of approximately 1,500 cubic meters of wood. It weighs roughly 2 million kilograms. Its lowest branch is almost 40 meters above the ground and is itself nearly 2 meters in diameter, larger than most trees in most forests. General Sherman is estimated to be between 2,300 and 2,700 years old, meaning it was already a mature tree when Alexander the Great was alive. But even the sequoias are not the oldest trees. The bristlecone pines of the White Mountains of California hold that record, with the oldest known individual, a tree called Methuselah, estimated at over 4,800 years old. It was already ancient when the Egyptians were building the pyramids. And even Methuselah is young compared to clonal tree colonies. A grove of quaking aspens in Utah called Pando is considered a single organism connected by a shared root system and has been estimated to be as old as 80,000 years, making it potentially the oldest living thing on Earth. Pando covers over 40 hectares and contains about 4,000 to 7,000 individual stems, all genetically identical, all connected underground to a single ancient root network that have been growing and regenerating since an era when the last ice age had barely ended. The canopy of a tropical rainforest is so dense and so rich that it functions as a separate ecosystem entirely, largely disconnected from the forest floor below. In the upper canopy, 50 to 60 meters above the ground, the sunlight is intense, the temperature fluctuates dramatically between day and night, and the wind can be strong. Plants that live here, principally the leaves of the tallest trees called emergence, must deal with conditions more similar to a dry open habitat than a humid forest. Below them, in the main canopy layer, the competition for light is fierce and unceasing. Trees grow toward gaps created by fallen neighbors, and the geometry of every canopy tree reflects its lifetime of reaching and adjusting. In the understory below the main canopy, the light is only about 1 to 2% of what falls on the surface above, filtered through layers of leaves and scattered into a dim, green-tinted world. Plants here have evolved enormous leaves to capture as much of this limited light as possible, and they grow slowly, conserving resources in the long wait for a gap to open above them. And on the forest floor itself, in the deep shade where less than 1% of sunlight penetrates, a world of fungi decomposes, and shade specialists operates in a chemical-rich dimness that most people would describe as dark even in the middle of the day. A tropical forest is not one habitat. It is at least 4 stacked on top of each other, each with its own climate, its own community of species, and its own rules. Let your body settle a little more deeply now. Notice the weight of the covers around you, the quiet of the room. The forest is patient. So are we. The Amazon rainforest produces its own rainfall, and without the trees the rains would not come. The forest transpires enormous quantities of water through its leaves every day, releasing it into the atmosphere as water vapor. This moisture rises, cools, and condenses into clouds that produce rainfall, some of which falls back on the forest and some of which is carried westward by the prevailing winds deeper into the continent. Researchers have measured these atmospheric rivers of moisture and found that they carry water in quantities comparable to the largest physical rivers, moving billions of tons of water per day across the continent. The interior of the Amazon basin, hundreds of kilometers from the Atlantic coast, receives rainfall that could not be explained by ocean evaporation alone. The forest is making its own rain, recycling moisture over and over as it moves westward across the continent. This means that deforestation in the Amazon is not simply a local problem. Clearing forests in the eastern Amazon reduces the moisture available for rainfall farther west. Models suggest that if deforestation reaches a certain threshold, the moisture recycling system could break down, transforming large portions of the forest into a drier savanna-like vegetation that cannot maintain the water cycle that the current forest depends on. The trees are not merely growing in a climate, they are creating it, and removing them changes the condition for everything that remains. Ancient forests that have never been cut are structurally and ecologically different from young forests in ways that go far beyond age alone. An old-growth forest accumulates deadwood over centuries, and this deadwood, in all its stages of decay, supports an extraordinary diversity of species that simply cannot survive in younger forests. Newly fallen logs provide habitat for beetles and other insects that begin the process of decomposition. As a log decays over decades, different communities of fungi, bacteria, and invertebrates colonize it in succession, each one preparing the way for the next. A very old, deeply decayed log, soft and rich with fungal threads, hosts species that require exactly that stage of decay and cannot use wood at any other stage. The hollow trunks of ancient living trees provide nesting cavities for birds, bats, and mammals that cannot nest in young trees without large cavities. The complex, multi-layered structure of an old-growth canopy, with trees of many different ages, heights, and conditions, creates a range of microhabitats and microclimates that a uniform young forest simply cannot replicate. An old-growth forest is not simply a collection of old trees. It is a community that has had centuries to develop interdependencies, fill every available niche, and build a complexity that cannot be shortcut by planting or regrowing. When an old-growth forest is lost, the loss is not recoverable on any human timescale. Certain trees produce chemicals specifically designed to prevent other plants from growing beneath them, a process called allelopathy that functions as a form of chemical warfare for space and resources. The black walnut tree is one of the most studied examples, producing a compound called juglone from its roots, leaves, and fruit husks that is toxic to many plant species. Tomatoes, apples, and many garden plants cannot grow within the root zone of a black walnut, wilting and dying even when they have adequate water, light, and nutrients. The toxin persists in the soil after the tree is removed and continues to affect plant growth for years afterward. Other trees use allelopathy more subtly, releasing compounds that inhibit the germination of seed beneath them rather than killing established plants, effectively preventing competition from establishing in the first place. Some species use allelopathy selectively, suppressing the growth of competing species while leaving members of their own species or closely related species unaffected, which is thought to allow them to create stands of their own kind that then benefit from the resource-sharing networks that connect related individuals. The forest floor, which looks like a passive surface available to any plant willing to grow there, is in fact a chemically managed territory, its occupancy shaped by the decisions, however unconscious, of the trees above. Here is a fact that will stay with you long after tonight. The trees in a forest recognize their own offspring. Studies in old-growth Douglas-fir forests in Canada found that when seedlings were grown near parent trees, the parent trees reduced the density of their own roots in the immediate area around the seedling, reducing competition for water and nutrients. Through the mycorrhizal network, the parent trees were found to transfer significantly more carbon to seedlings of their own species and to unrelated seedlings growing in the same conditions. When the parent tree was injured or dying, the transfer of carbon and nutrients to nearby seedlings increased dramatically, as if the dying tree was channeling its remaining resources toward the next generation before it fell. Researcher Suzanne Samar, who led much of this work, described the oldest trees in a forest as mother trees, not as a sentimental label but as an accurate description of their ecological function. They support the young. They share resources with the struggling. And when they die, they release not just the carbon stored in their wood, but the resources flowing through their network connections in a final act of transfer to the seedlings growing in their shadow. Whether this constitutes anything like intention is a question that biology cannot currently answer, but the behavior, observed and measured in controlled experiments, is consistent and real. The forest takes care of its own. The sounds of a healthy forest are not random. They form what acoustic ecologists call a soundscape, an organized acoustic environment in which different species occupy different frequency ranges and time slots, reducing overlap and competition for the acoustic space in much the same way that species divide up the physical space of the habitat. Dawn in a temperate forest begins with a dawn chorus, a coordinated explosion of birdsong in which species begin singing in a sequence that has been consistent enough to be recorded and analyzed across decades and locations. High-frequency singers lead, followed by progressively lower-frequency voices as the light intensifies. Insects fill the middle frequencies of the day. Frogs and amphibians often dominate the evening. And through all of this, the low background sound of wind in the canopy provides a constant acoustic backdrop that carries its own information about weather, wind direction, and the movement of large animals through the forest. Acoustic ecologists have found that the richness and complexity of a forest soundscape is a reliable indicator of its ecological health. A disturbed or degraded forest sounds different from a healthy one, with gaps in the acoustic spectrum where species have been lost. Researchers now use acoustic monitoring, recording the soundscape and analyzing it with software as a rapid and sensitive tool for assessing forest biodiversity without the need to observe individual species directly. The forest announces its own health and sound, if you know how to listen. Let yourself sink a little deeper now. Let the images of the forest settle quietly behind your eyes. The canopy is high above, and through its gaps you can see a sky that is slowly turning dark. The air here is cool and still and smells of soil and wood. Bioluminescent fungi grow in forests across the world, and on dark nights in the right woodland, the forest floor glows green. There are over 80 known species of bioluminescent mushroom, and they are found on every inhabited continent except Antarctica, colonizing fallen wood and leaf litter in tropical and subtropical forests. The glow is produced by the same type of chemical reaction as in fireflies, involving a luciferin molecule reacting with oxygen in the presence of an enzyme, but the specific molecules involved in fungi are different from those in any animal bioluminescence and appear to have evolved independently. Why fungi glow is a question that has been debated for decades. One hypothesis suggests the light attracts insects that carry spores to new locations. Another suggests it may be a byproduct of metabolic processes involved in wood decomposition, rather than a signal at all. Recent experiments have found that the glow of some species is bright enough and consistent enough in timing to attract insects that do appear to disperse spores, supporting the signaling hypothesis for at least some species. Walking through a tropical forest at night and encountering patches of glowing fungi on a fallen log is described by everyone who has experienced it as one of the most magical things they have ever seen. The forest, which gives so much of itself in daylight, reserves some of its most extraordinary performances for the dark. Forest fires, though often portrayed as purely destructive, are in many ecosystems a fundamental part of the cycle of renewal that keeps the forest healthy over the long term. Many plant species in fire-adapted ecosystems have evolved to depend on fire for their reproduction and survival. The lodgepole pine produces serotinous cones, sealed shut with resin that only melts in the heat of a fire, releasing seeds onto the ash-covered, competition-free ground left behind by the flames. Some species of Banksia in Australia produce seed pods so strongly sealed that they require intense heat to open, ensuring that seeds are released only after fire has cleared the competition and created the open, nutrient-rich conditions in which their seedlings thrive. The giant sequoias of California require fire to prepare their seedbeds, with their tiny seeds needing bare mineral soil and full sunlight to establish, conditions that only exist after fire has removed the thick duff layer of organic material on the forest floor. Many birds and mammals are fire followers, species that arrive immediately after a fire to exploit the flush of new growth and the abundance of insects and small mammals that colonize burned areas. In ecosystems shaped by regular fire over millions of years, its suppression can lead to the accumulation of fuel and the eventual production of fires far more intense and damaging than those the ecosystem evolved to withstand. Fire is not the enemy of the forest. In many forests, it is the engine of its renewal. The relationship between forests and water goes far beyond the rainfall that the Amazon generates. Forests are the most effective natural water purification and regulation systems on Earth. When rain falls on a forested catchment, the canopy intercepts a significant portion of it, slowing its descent and allowing some to evaporate before reaching the ground. The rest reaches the forest floor, where the thick layer of organic material absorbs it like a sponge, releasing it slowly into the soil over days and weeks. The root systems of trees and the activity of soil organisms maintain the structure of the soil, keeping it permeable and preventing compaction and runoff that occur on bare or degraded ground. Water that percolates through a forested soil is filtered through layers of mineral and organic material, and through the activity of microorganisms that break down contaminants, emerging in springs and streams far cleaner than it entered. Many of the world's major cities depend on forested catchments for their drinking water supply, and the economic value of this forest service has been calculated to be enormous. New York City famously chose to protect the forests and farmlands of the Catskill watershed rather than build a water filtration plant, a decision that saved billions of dollars in infrastructure costs and has provided clean water for decades. The forest is a water utility, a flood barrier, and a drought buffer, all at once, running continuously without maintenance costs, powered by sunlight. Now, just for a moment, notice your own breathing. In and out, slow and easy. The forest around you is doing exactly the same, in timescales far longer than yours, but with the same quiet rhythm of taking in and releasing, holding and letting go. The forest is its own pharmacy, and indigenous peoples around the world have known this for thousands of years. Approximately 25% of all pharmaceutical drugs currently in use are derived from or modeled on compounds first found in plants, and a significant portion of those plants are forest species. The Pacific yew tree, found in old-growth forests of the Pacific Northwest, produces a compound called Taxol that became one of the most important cancer chemotherapy agents ever developed. The rosy periwinkle, native to the forests of Madagascar, provided the compound vincristine and vinblastine, which transformed the treatment of childhood leukemia and dramatically improved survival rates. Quinine, from the bark of the cinchona tree of the Andean cloud forest, was for centuries the only effective treatment for malaria and has saved more lives than almost any other drug. The aspirin that hundreds of millions of people take every day was developed from salicin, a compound found in the bark of willow trees. Researchers estimate that only a small fraction of the estimated 300,000 plant species on Earth have been screened for pharmaceutical potential, and that tropical forests, which contain the greatest concentration of plant diversity, are likely to hold many compounds of medical value that have not yet been discovered. Every hectare of tropical forest that is cleared before its plant species have been catalogued and studied as potentially destroying medicines that could save lives that have not yet been lived. The oldest forests on Earth are not the tropical rainforests, though they are among the most biodiverse. The boreal forests, also called taiga, that stretch across Canada, Russia, and Scandinavia in an almost continuous belt around the top of the northern hemisphere represent the largest terrestrial biome on Earth, covering approximately 11 million square kilometers. They have existed in broadly similar forms since the end of the last ice age, approximately 12,000 years ago, and contain tree species that were already ancient when human civilization began. The boreal forest stores an enormous quantity of carbon, not primarily in its trees, which are relatively small and slow-growing in the cold climate, but in its soils and peat deposits. The waterlogged, oxygen-poor conditions in boreal wetlands slow the decomposition of organic material to a near standstill, causing it to accumulate over thousands of years into deep peat deposits that hold carbon captured from the atmosphere by plants that died before agriculture was invented. The boreal forest and its associated peatlands store more carbon than all the tropical forests combined, and this carbon has been accumulating since the last ice age without interruption. As the climate warms, the boreal forest faces threats from insect outbreaks, wildfires, and permafrost thaw, each of which can release stored carbon back to the atmosphere. The quiet, cold, seemingly empty stretches of spruce and larch across the northern latitudes are one of the most important carbon stores on the planet. Some trees live as parasites on other trees, drawing their water and nutrient from a host without contributing photosynthesis of their own. The mistletoe, the familiar plant of winter celebrations, is in fact a hemoparasite, meaning it can photosynthesize but also taps into the water and mineral supply of its host tree through specialized root-like structures called haustoria that penetrate the host bark and connect to its vascular system. Heavy infestations of mistletoe can weaken a host tree significantly, reducing its growth and in some cases contributing to its death. But mistletoe is also a keystone species in many ecosystems. Its berries are a critical food source for certain birds, including the mistle thrush, which gets its name from its association with the plant. In Australian forests, the mistletoe is a disproportionately important food and habitat source for an enormous range of animals, and research has found that removing mistletoe from a woodland dramatically reduces the diversity of birds that can live there. The forest parasite is simultaneously a burden on individual trees and a gift to the broader community, illustrating the principle that in ecology, no organism has a simple, singular role. Tropical cloud forests exist at elevations where the forest is immersed in cloud for much of the year, and the result is an ecosystem of extraordinary strangeness and richness. Cloud forests occur on tropical mountains at elevations typically between 1,500 and 3,000 meters, where the combination of tropical warmth and altitude creates conditions in which the air is perpetually laden with moisture, and the trees are draped in thick blankets of moss, ferns, and other epiphytic plants that draw their water directly from the cloud rather than from the soil. Cloud forests intercept horizontal precipitation from passing clouds in quantities that can dwarf the vertical rainfall, with some forests capturing more water from fog and cloud than from rain. The trees themselves are shorter and more gnarled than lowland tropical forest trees, twisted by wind and weighted with wet moss into shapes of extraordinary beauty. Every surface is colonized. Orchids, bromeliads, ferns, mosses, and liverworts cover trunks and branches in layers, and the diversity of these epiphytes in a single cloud forest can exceed the total plant diversity of entire temperate countries. The quetzal, one of the most spectacular birds in the world, lives in cloud forests in Central America and depends entirely on the fruits of cloud forest trees for its diet. Cloud forests are among the most threatened ecosystems on Earth because a specific combination of altitude, temperature, and cloud cover that creates them is highly sensitive to climate change, and as temperatures rise, the cloud level rises with them, literally lifting the forest water source above its canopy. Let the weight of your body rest completely now. You do not need to hold anything. The forest holds enough for both of us. Forests have shaped the course of human civilization in ways that go far beyond timber and fuel. The clearing of forests in ancient Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean changed the hydrology of those regions, contributing to soil erosion and the silting of rivers that undermined agricultural productivity and may have contributed to the decline of civilizations that depended on those rivers. The forests of ancient Lebanon, the famous cedars, were so extensively harvested for the construction of temples, ships, and palaces throughout the ancient world that they were reduced from vast forests to the small remnant groves that survive today, protected as a national symbol. The deforestation of Easter Island, a story sometimes cited as a cautionary tale of environmental collapse, appears to have removed the trees needed for canoes that allowed the island's inhabitants to fish in deep water, contributing to a food crisis that preceded the cultural collapse. The forests of medieval Europe were so economically important that elaborate laws governed their use, and the rights to gather wood, graze animals, and hunt in royal forests were among the most fiercely contested political issues of the era. In more recent history, the forests of the American Pacific Northwest became the site of one of the defining environmental conflicts of the late 20th century, as the old-growth forests that had taken thousands of years to develop were cleared at a rate that could not continue for more than a few more decades. Every age of human history has been shaped partly by what forests existed, where they were, and what humans did with them. The strangest forests on Earth may not be on land at all. Kelp forests, growing in cold, clear, nutrient-rich coastal waters along temperate coastlines around the world, are underwater forests of giant brown algae that can grow to heights of 4 to 5 meters and create habitats of extraordinary structural complexity. Giant kelp grows faster than almost any other organism on Earth, adding up to 60 centimeters per day under ideal conditions and forming dense, multi-layered canopies that filter sunlight into the dim blue-green depths below exactly as a terrestrial forest filters light to its floor. Sea otters, leopard sharks, rockfish, sea lions, Garibaldi fish, and hundreds of species of invertebrate living in and around kelp forests, which rival tropical coral reefs in their species diversity per unit area. The kelp itself is not a plant but an alga, and its relationship to the ecosystem around it has many parallels to terrestrial forest trees despite its completely different evolutionary origin. Urchins graze on kelp and, if unchecked by predators, can destroy entire kelp forests in what is called an ocean barren, a rocky moonscape where nothing grows. Sea otters control urchin populations and are therefore a keystone species for the kelp forest survival. Where sea otters have been reintroduced after being hunted nearly to extinction, the kelp forest has returned within years. The ocean has its own forests, and they are no less extraordinary than the ones on land. As you drift toward sleep, take a moment to imagine yourself standing at the base of a very old tree. Not looking up at it, just standing beside it, your back against the back, feeling the solidity of it. This tree was here before your grandparents' grandparents were born. It has weathered every storm of the past several centuries. The roots beneath your feet go down deeper than you are tall. And all around it, invisible in the dark, the fungal threads are carrying their quiet cargo from tree to tree through the soil. The forest floor is one of the most biologically active environments on Earth, and the process of decomposition that happens there is what makes new life possible. A single gram of healthy forest soil contains billions of bacteria, millions of fungi, and thousands of other microorganisms, all engaged in breaking down the dead material that falls from the canopy above. A fallen leaf on a temperate forest floor will typically be completely decomposed within 1 to 3 years, its nutrients released back into the soil where roots can absorb them for new growth. In tropical forests with higher temperatures and moisture, decomposition is faster, and the forest floor is often surprisingly thin because the recycling of nutrients is almost immediate. The invertebrates involved in this process, mites, springtails, millipedes, earthworms, and many others, shred and mix the organic material, increasing its surface area for microbial attack and physically moving nutrients through the soil profile. The earthworm alone, in a temperate forest, processes an astonishing quantity of soil in a year, and Charles Darwin, who spent decades studying earthworms, concluded that the entire topsoil of England had passed through the bodies of earthworms several times over. Without the forest floor community, the nutrients locked in dead wood and fallen leaves would remain unavailable to living plants. The cycling of matter through the ecosystem would stop, and the forest would exhaust itself within a few generations of trees. Trees do not simply grow taller and wider over time. They grow smarter about the use of their own resources. Young trees allocate most of their energy to height growth, racing to reach the canopy before competitors shade them out. Once they reach the canopy and secure their place in the light, the balance shifts. A mature tree invests more heavily in root development, in defensive chemistry, in reproduction, and in the storage of reserve that can sustain it through difficult years. Very old trees in some species show a phenomenon called crown shyness, in which the canopy of each tree stops growing just short of contact with its neighbors, leaving thin channels of sky between the canopy edges that are visible as cracks of light when you look up from below. The mechanism behind crown shyness is not fully understood. It may involve abrasion damage from contact with neighboring branches and wind, or chemical signals that inhibit growth in directions where competition is detected, or both. The result is a canopy that divides space with precision that will be difficult to improve on, giving each tree maximal access to light without the energy costs and damage of constant conflict with neighbors. The forest organizes itself in ways that look, from a distance, like deliberate planning, and the patterns it produces are ones that human designers have repeatedly found worth studying and emulating. There are forests in the world that have never been touched by an axe, never been burned deliberately, never been logged, and in which the oldest trees are alive today for the simple reason that the terrain around them was too steep, too remote, or too economically marginal to be worth the effort of extraction. These pockets of intact ancient forests exist on every continent except Antarctica, and they are among the most ecologically valuable places on Earth. In them, the full range of forest processes operates as it has for thousands of years, without the interruption of human management. The dead wood accumulates through its full range of decay stages. The old trees develop their cavities and rough bark and lightning scars and the other features of great age that younger trees do not have. The mycorrhizal network has had centuries to develop its connections and its complexity. The animal communities have had time to develop their full diversity and their intricate interdependencies. These ancient forests are not just beautiful. They are irreplaceable scientific archives of how a forest works when nothing gets in the way. Every year they exist unchanged as a year in which they continue to perform services, store carbon, clean water, regulate climate, and support biodiversity that younger forests cannot match. And every year that passes without them being disturbed is a year in which they grow, very slightly, older and more complex, in a direction that has no shortcut and no substitute. The night is deep now, and the forest outside is at its quietest. The canopy holds the darkness in. The roots reach downward through the cold soil. The fungal threads carry their slow freight from tree to tree. And somewhere in an old hollow trunk, something small and warm is sleeping, the way you are about to sleep, held by the forest's patient and ancient dark. And so we drift gently back from the world of the forest, carrying with us a quiet weight of everything we have visited tonight. We stood at the base of a tree that was old when civilization began, and felt the roots below us reaching down through centuries of accumulated soil. We listened to chemical conversations passing through the air between trees warning each other of danger, and traced the fungal highways carrying sugar and water and signals through the dark beneath the forest floor. We watched the Amazon make its own rain and send it westward in rivers of air that no one can see. We found forests that glow in the dark with a soft green light of bioluminescent fungi, and forests wrapped in cloud that collect their water directly from the passing sky. We learned that a mother tree, dying, channels her last resources to the seedlings growing in her shadow. We walked through forests that contain the cures to diseases we have not yet named, and forests that have been storing carbon from the atmosphere for 8,000 uninterrupted years. We found that the forest floor is as alive as a canopy, that every fallen leaf is a meal for a community of millions, and that nothing in the forest is truly lost, only transformed and returned. The forest is not a backdrop. It is not a resource. It is a living system of almost incomprehensible complexity and generosity, and it has been breathing on this planet since long before anything with hands ever touched it. It will outlast us if we let it. And tonight, for a little while, it has held us gently in its dark and its quiet, the way it holds everything that rests within it. If you enjoyed this sleepy journey, you could support the channel by liking, subscribing, or leaving a calm little comment before you rest. It helps more curious minds find their way here. And if you are still awake, there's another video waiting on your screen, ready to carry you onward into another corner of science. But for now, let the questions loosen their grip. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. Allow your breathing to slow, steady, and deepen. Picture yourself lying on the soft floor of a very old forest, the soil beneath you deep and warm, the canopy high above filtering the last of the light into green and gold. The roots are all around you, and the threads beneath you, and the slow chemical conversations passing through the air. You are resting in the oldest living system on Earth, held by it, breathing with it, part of it for this one quiet night. Sleep well, and good night.